Dear members of my strategy community, welcome to our second episode of the University of Strategy, Strategy Made Simple and Elegant. If you think of the heart, mind, and soul of strategy as the strategist, the science, and the purpose of strategy respectively, it would be an understatement to say that over the years, one has put a much greater emphasis on both the science and more recently, the purpose of strategy. But what about the human dimension of strategy? Because the reality is that if strategy has a heart, mind, and soul, so does the strategist carrying the strategy. And that leaves us with one question. What are the heart, mind, and soul of the strategist? And if I translate that question into the daily life of business, the question now becomes, what do strategists actually do? And to me, answering that question boils down to one single expression, carrying the strategic elegance of simplicity. And that expression is MI6, standing for mastering the 6 intangibles of strategic thinking. And those intangibles are ideas, information, interpretation, insight, intuition, and inspiration. And they all collectively constitute spheres of excellence of the strategist. So let's dive into the details of each, starting with ideas. Ideas are the golden raw materials of the strategist, as well as the starting block of any strategy, whether they originate from casual observation, insightful questions, reframing of the current reality, or even frustrations of unmet needs as potential customers. Now, ideas might still be at a very early stage and need more room to grow, mature, and ultimately come to strategic fruition. Nevertheless, strategy will start there. Now, the second intangible is information, or in other words, the data informing the whole strategic continuum of the firm, from strategic thinking to monitoring. And while the spectrum of information supporting strategic decision-making is tremendous, in a context of exponential abundance of data, it's critical to stay clear and focused on the most relevant and impactful information according to the strategy you aspire to develop. Now let's move on to the third intangible, the 3-step process of data interpretation. But there's a catch. Data interpretation actually never starts with data. It starts with environment. And reading the environment is essential because strategy is fundamentally contextual. And your strategic success factor may be very much tied to your capacity to either read, anticipate, or act on a particular strategic context. Classic examples of misread environment with devastating implications for the strategic trajectories of companies are Kodak and Nokia. Kodak misreading and even downplaying the emergence of digital photography, while Nokia in the early 2000s failed to recognize and act upon the early signs of the smartphone revolution in the mobile phone industry. Now, the second step of the process is determining your angle of interpretation, i.e., your analytical approach. And once clear on the environment interpretation and the angle of interpretation, then one is in pretty good place to actually start diving into the details of data analysis and interpretation. Intangible number 4, insight. And this one requires a bit of attention because it's a key differentiator between the very good, the excellent, and the exceptional strategist. And I consider insight the highest and most transcending level of data interpretation. And by definition, insight is nothing less than a superior piece of knowledge or understanding derived from superior wisdom, discernment, or capacity to see things differently, be it through pattern recognition, unconventional ideas associations, or the reconfiguration of existing elements. A good measure of the quality, the weight, or the impact of an insight lies in its potential to either completely shift a strategy trajectory or open a totally new path worth exploring. Now, you might wonder what insight may look like in real strategy life. And with that in mind, I'm going to share with you 3 insights attached to Ryanair's disruption of the airline industry to illustrate the point. Insight number 1, the value proposition insight, derived from their way they looked at the traditionally bundled value proposition of the industry, which they broke down to its core component to then strategically reduce it to a core minimum, considering everything as extra. And this core minimum value proposition led to 2 things. First, a completely redesign of the pricing strategy. And second, it led to a second level of insight, the business model insight. Because bringing life to this core minimum value proposition required a reconfiguration of the business model into what is now known as the low-cost business model of the airline industry. And that second insight led to a third insight, an industry-level insight. Companies compete on business model way beyond product and services. Now, taking those insights together gives us a very strong evidence of the far-reaching implication deep insight can have, not only on the strategic trajectory of companies, but also on entire industries. Now, let's move on to intangible number 5, intuition, which I define as a superior spiritual form of reflection leading to instant, crystal clear understanding or solution, but without any form of rational thinking. And intuition can essentially come in 2 forms. First, it can be deeply ingrained in personal gut feeling, gut instinct, and one's capacity to listen to it, or it can rest on years and years of experience, expertise, and business practice, allowing to develop a form of strategic intuition. But either way, intuition can either stand on its own feet and dictate strategic decision, or it can be leveraged in conjunction with a more data-driven approach to support strategic decision-making effectively. Finally, intangible number 6, inspiration of people through a 2-sided story of purpose. And the first side of the story is an internal alignment story, starting with a leadership story. story CEOs and business leaders tell themselves as a form of self-inspiration and alignment with the strategic purpose they have defined for their company. But there's an even more important internal story. Is the story CEOs and business leaders tell their employees to inspire them and give them an opportunity to feel aligned and engaged with the strategic purpose of their company. Ideally, in a way that strengthens meaning throughout its strategy implementation. Now, the second side of the story is a story of external alignment, aimed at aligning external stakeholders, sharing a commonality of purpose, and who might potentially help CEOs and business leaders amplify their own strategy. And inspiration is critical because ultimately strategy is also a matter of federation and mobilization. Now, from ideas to inspiration, the complete view on the MI6 frameworks gives us an opportunity to answer the initial question: what do strategists actually do? Which brings us back to the heart, mind, and soul of the strategist. And through the 6 intangibles of strategic thinking, strategists act as activator of the strategy, and thereby they act as activator of the result of the company. Fundamentally, the brilliance of a strategy is either confirmed by its successful implementation or denied by its failure. And that's where the magic of the strategist happens. Because the real magic of the strategist goes beyond the MI6, beyond mastering the intangibles of strategic thinking. The real magic of the strategist lies in the power of transformation, the power to transform strategic thinking into strategic results, and the power to transform intangible thinking into tangible outcomes for business and society through strategy. So I trust you can envision the MI6 as a framework of strategic excellence that you can leverage not only to enrich and broaden your own strategic thinking, but also, and most importantly, to elevate the strategy of your company